I'm excited here to talk about how to plan digital projects. Before we jump into the webinar, I just want to touch base on, who is this talk for? This talk is for anybody who has just a brilliant idea that needs to be realized as a digital product, right? Whether it's a website or an application, mobile application, etc. What's interesting is that, before the webinar, somebody reached out and asked, are we going to talk about the difference between projects and products? And I think, this is a really important question, which is the primary difference between a project and a product is that a successful project comes to an end, and a successful product does not. And so, a product is your website or a feature on your website or an application, or the end result of a project. And so what we're here to do is just take that brilliant idea and how do you go from, ideation to implementation. And I thought this was an important talk to give. It was originally organized for the digital summit, marketing summit. And I thought this was an important talk for a wider group, because not just people who build websites and applications all the time, but for everyone, because every company is a software company. And when we're talking about building software, it's just like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. You go from one side to the other and then you start again. Software is never done being developed. And that's one of the reasons why the difference between a project, which has a defined end state, and a product is really important. It's an important distinction to make. And it's also just important to remember to note that it's really easy to get it wrong in software. I know it might be weird coming from me as the messenger of this, but the numbers on the outcomes for website projects in particular can be really challenging. Just a few numbers that are out there. One is about 33% of website projects do not launch on time. About a fifth don't make the stakeholders happy, so they don't actually meet the requirements from other people within your organization. And a full quarter of web projects just simply fail. And that a failure, of course, means the thing doesn't launch. But failure also means it came in way over budget or underpowered, or it just simply doesn't draw an audience. And that's it. I mean, these numbers are really scary coming into these projects. And so, when you look at the reasons why these projects don't come across, is the first one is that the people who are putting together this piece of software just didn't understand the needs of the business. Like, what is the value to the organization? The second is that every project that is worth doing typically has a team behind it, and so that team needs to be in alignment on what the priorities are. And again, since software is never done officially, if you don't have an alignment on your priorities, you never really deliver anything, because you can spin wheels very, very easily. And that also becomes a challenge if you don't have a priority straight. Then the strategy, like how are we going to make this effective for the organization, simply never comes together. And if you don't have a strategy, you're not going to be able to focus on the user. And of course, in the end, this is all going to come across as unclear requirements. You read this from the bottom up, this list from the bottom up. It looks like the sort of the 5 whys, the analysis of a project. So we had unclear requirements because we didn't focus on the user. We didn't focus on the user because we didn't have strategy. We didn't have a strategy because we didn't align on priorities, and we couldn't align on priorities because we didn't understand the value of this project. What's interesting to me when I was reading this blog post was none of these top 5 reasons, the top reasons why a project doesn't work, has to do with the software. It's not, you don't see the top reason being we went with a SaaS product instead of going open source, or we went with WordPress instead of Drupal. These are not technology problems on these projects. These are communication issues. And the biggest problem with communication is thinking that it's already been done. It's I think when we have an idea in our mind, we believe that other people can understand what that idea is, just sort of inherently. It just makes sense to everyone. It makes sense to us, so it makes sense to everybody else. But the truth is if we're not engaging in active communication throughout this project, even like-minded people who are trying to achieve the same goals can fall out of alignment really, really easily. This doesn't make for a great work environment, but it also it hurts the work product in the end. The piece of software can get overbuilt, or things that might seem like it's appropriate for the user isn't quite meeting the user needs. And so when coming back to that, that brilliant idea, that thing that we want to do and experiment with, ultimately software needs amazing execution. And in order to get to that execution, we need an actionable plan. In order to get to that plan, we need alignment within the team. And so that's what this talk is about. We're looking to get to a place where we're planning a project where everybody's in alignment, the scope is defined, and we can all move forward knowing what the outcome will be. Just to introduce myself, my name is Joe Crespo. I'm the VP of Business Development here at Aten. I've been with Aten for a little over 9 years now. I was originally hired, well, I've been building websites for 25. I started my career as a graphic designer, pretty quickly pivoted to web design, and then about a year or two in, pivoted to web development. And in fact, 9 years ago when I was hired at Aten, I was hired as a developer. Since then, I spent several years transitioning to project management. And then for the past few years, I've been in this seat helping clients plan their projects and onboard new clients to Aten. And so that's how I come at these planning these projects. So just coming back to that brilliant idea and executing that brilliant idea. I think prior to sitting in my seat, my current role, I always thought of, as a developer and a project manager, I always thought of the project timeline from kickoff to delivery. Right? This is the project itself. But this is actually a sort of a myopic view of a project. The part of the iceberg above the waterline is really what I was thinking of as the project. And that's not really where the project starts. The project starts at inception. And that's where we are right now. We have this idea, we want to execute this idea. And we want to make sure that any problems that'll happen during the project, we're mitigating risk on those issues that will inevitably come up. Change management on digital projects is extremely important. This is why agile software development is a thing. It's been around for a while. It has many different flavors. Just change management is really important because digital projects are risky. And I want to just point out that you might look at this timeline and say, oh, Joe, that's great. You have all kinds of time for planning, but really. I don't get that kind of lead time for a project. My lead time is much smaller, and I want to just say that ignoring risk doesn't make it go away. You're either mitigating risk prior to a project, or you're accepting more risk on the project. It's simply it's not going to just disappear. And it reminds me of the Winston Churchill quote: like, the plans are of little importance, right? Change management is going to happen on these projects, but having that plan is essential. The actual planning is essential. And I think, oftentimes when we have little lead time, or, if we have a hard charging person, I know that oftentimes when I'm thinking about a new project or initiative, the first question I ask is, how do we get started? But I think this is an important question, but it's the lowest priority question here at the inception of our idea. There are a number of questions that we need to go through before we can get there. And this the rest of this presentation is kind of a salt to taste rubric for how to plan a project. And these 4 questions are sort of the 4 pillars of project planning. The arrow of time moves in one direction, so I have to talk about this chronologically, but these questions are not in chronological order. This is simply a priority list of questions that need to be answered. You'll come back as you're planning, you'll come back to these questions again and again. We'll talk about that in a second. So the first question whenever I'm thinking about a new project or sitting down with a client to plan a project is the question is, who is it for? And it's, maybe it's for you, there's somebody on your team that has this idea, or if this is your idea, or you're trying to meet a requirement somewhere with from a boss. Projects are never built for the organization. They're built for people outside of the organization who will be working with the product, who will be using the product that you'll be building. So the question is, who is the audience? Who does this need to appeal to? As a Daniel Pink in his book, This is Marketing, has a whole great section about, this is not for you. There are some things we build and some people don't get what we're doing, and that's okay. It's not for them. We need to make sure we understand our audience and we're tailoring what we're building for them. So like if you find yourself writing a persona that says general public or human beings, that's too broad for it to be actionable. So really making sure that you're drilling down into those personas. Persona work and user research is not just its own talk, it's its own, not only just own conference, it's its own series of conferences. So, I mean, I think that you salt to taste about understanding your audiences. And of course, in your organization, in the project itself, you might be refining the personas and their motivations as a part of discovery. But I think it's important to at least have an outline before you get started. And, when you're thinking about your audiences, think about the benefit to them. Right? Why would they, they say websites are really the thing that get in the way to the thing I want to do. And so what we want to do is make sure that the benefit to the audience is really clear to them and speaking to them in their language. And then finally, of course, why is this important for the organization? You could launch a website tomorrow that gave away dollar bills for free. It would be the most heavily trafficked website for as long as you stayed in business, but it would have no benefit to the organization. So ultimately, the product needs to benefit the organization and appeal to users. And so this is essentially, where we want to start this conversation. And we're going to keep coming back to this because, we also need, oftentimes we think of who this is for as one of our stakeholders, as somebody we work with, but that's our stakeholders. That's who needs to weigh in on this project. I think, when we work on projects, we set key performance indicators or KPIs to understand if the project has been successful or not. But regardless of how many KPIs you meet on your project, the perception of success is just as important as success on your project. And there's a really easy way to get there, which is you want to get stakeholder buy-in. And that also has a pretty simple formula for stakeholder buy-in, which is you gather their input and you listen to their feedback. Now, I think, and again, this is something that I'm guilty of all the time. Sometimes I'll think, oh, if I get a lot of people involved, it'll slow me down. I'll get involved in committee think or mired in, the scope of my project is going to blow up while everybody's throwing in ideas. I think I'm not recommending that you simply accept the ideation from your colleagues without any kind of analysis. I think whenever you're hearing an idea, whether you think it's a great idea that absolutely has to be in the project or a terrible idea that you need to defend your project from, I think it's really important to always come back to that question: who is this for? Right? We're looking to add a new feature or a new requirement to this project. Why is this important for us? I think coming back to that is really important. That helps set priorities across the features. And by having this open discussion with each of your stakeholders, you give them a sense that there are other priorities that you need to be responding to. So it makes the work a little bit more visible to them, in addition to setting expectations as to whether or not the idea that they've pitched to you is going to get into the project or not. And of course, there's ways to manage that. We'll talk about that a bit. I think when I think about who needs to weigh in, I of course think about leadership, right? It's leadership within the organization. Now, an organization like Aten, leadership is we're about 26, 27 people at the moment. Leadership is our boss, our CEO, Justin Tupin. But some people work in 1,000-person organizations, and the CEO of that organization might not really have a line of sight on the microsite you're looking to build. So leadership in that instance might be your boss's boss. And oftentimes, leadership and the executive sponsors are one and the same, but sometimes, you have a funder or you have a grant, and you want to make sure that you're being responsive to them as well. Your organization may have some subject matter experts that you'll want to weigh in with, that you want to have them, whether that's if you are a research organization, perhaps the researchers would want to weigh in, or if you're a university faculty, the people that are actually they're doing the work that you need to promote with the website or application. And then, of course, the relevant programs that will touch this this project, right? So if you're building an event management system, you want the events team weighing in on that piece of work. And then of course, you need the people who are going to be doing the day-to-day work on this project. And they will also be typically responsible for maintaining this project after it launches. Again, software is never done being built. So if you're building a new digital product, you're actually, you're affecting the work-life balance of the people in the core teams. You want to make sure that they're weighing in on what you're building as well. If you have a small stakeholder group, it's, I find it really helpful to, just grab lunch. If you're just talking about like 3 or 4 people, get lunch with them and talk about the project, and then have like a follow-up with some homework and maybe a whiteboarding session. That might be a good way of getting it started. But sometimes you have a large organization. I mean, we work with a ton of large organizations. And in those instances, you really want to survey your stakeholders. And of course, you want to survey them for, what's animating them about this, what they might be concerned about in the project. You want to understand what is their sources of inspiration, like where are they drawing, if they have an idea that they want to incorporate, or like a design that they particularly like, where are they finding this work? Get that source of information as well. And of course, all of this is, understanding and get what they believe the user audiences should be, right? So getting a sense of what their concerns, aspirations, inspiration, and who they think the audience should be. That'll give you a good sense, or sort of fleshing out the initial ideas that you started with. It also gives you a really good sense of where your stakeholders are going to be engaged and disinterested, right? There will be people who are fully engaged in your project. They want to be a part of everything, like people on your core team, for example. Those people are fairly easy to manage throughout the project. The disinterested people are also pretty easy to manage, because they're not going to, you do you is what they're saying. So, you can move ahead without getting them involved. However, there is a third group of stakeholders out there, and those are the people who are disinterested but need to be engaged, right? That's oftentimes these are leadership, or the subject matter experts that typically aren't on the people who aren't on the day-to-day team. Those people need to weigh in. They have, especially if they're a decision maker on the project, they have the ability to put the kibosh on the project. So you want to make sure that you're getting that input early. And ideally before the project even begins. And so I just recommend really staying on top of that communication. This is where those project management skills are really, really helpful. Just active and direct communication with the people that need to hear from you. It's also, there's sometimes the stakeholders maybe they have some news that they feel shy about sharing because it's bad news. I love the quote from one of our colleagues here, Andre Billings, is a senior PM. She says, "Bad news doesn't get better with time." So we really want to make sure that we're getting that communication, active communication from our stakeholders. Another thing that I find really helpful is building a RACI chart, and we recommend this with our clients. Is just understanding this is breaking down your project into a series of features and requirements, and then essentially looking at who is responsible for what, who's accountable for what, who needs to be consulted on what, and who needs to be informed about what's happening, right? So, your designer is responsible for creating your homepage. Your marketing lead may be accountable for making sure that homepage is effective. You want to make sure leadership is consulted on that homepage before it launches, and maybe there's a wider stakeholder group that just simply needs to know what's coming. This is really helpful. This is a great way of making sure that your project timeline isn't getting expanded or slip for slip with every delayed response from your stakeholders. Understanding what their responsibilities are on this project is really helpful. And so, again, this is who needs to weigh in. And again, this is salt to taste. So this may be for large organizations, you might need to do a big engagement to get their buy-in. For small organizations, it might just be a few meetings. The next question is, what needs to be done, right? You might say, well, Joe, I started out with a brilliant idea. I already knew what needed to be done. And then you had me go do all this homework. Well, Muhammad Ali said, a man who thinks the same thing at 50 that he did at 20 has wasted 30 years of his life. In the same sense, you started with a brilliant idea. You've thought about your users and defined your audiences. You met with your stakeholders and get their ideas. That brilliant idea has likely evolved since then. And so you want to make sure that you still, even after this homework has been done, that you still have a very clear picture of what needs to be done. And if that's where you are after doing the homework, then the next step is to list the requirements. Understand and understand the priority of those requirements. Some things are critical, some things are nice to have. Critical things are like accessibility and security, and nice to have is I guess like a Twitter feed on your homepage. It's not even nice to have. The analytics on that are terrible. It slows down your page load speed. It damages your SEO, and it has less than 1% user engagement. So I don't recommend putting that in. But I just want to say that you should have your requirements listed and understand the priority order. It's also worth, you have a bunch of people. You want to make sure that you're all working from the same assumptions. For example, you might have had 9 months to plan the project, or 9 months to deliver the project when you started, and now after doing your homework, you have 7 months. Does everybody know that the timeline is now compressed to 7 months, or is everybody still operating under the belief that there's 9 months in front of them? Another couple things, the last 2 points are just keeping it simple. First, it's very easy to pile on requirements at the beginning of a project. And I think that it's being steely-eyed about the requirements and keeping it as simple as humanly possible will set up your project for success. And that means sometimes dividing and conquering. It might mean that you need to divide these projects into multiple projects, or sometimes you'll have some feedback from the stakeholder that's a pain point on the website that doesn't need to be in the new website, but it does require a workaround for your colleague. That is a great way of making sure that that you're defending your project and also just keeping it as condensed as possible. And the reason why this is important is that when I was going back to those numbers earlier about like website failure, the bigger the project gets, the riskier it gets, right? So when you're talking about digital projects, they're not all made the same. When you're talking about like a digital transformation project, something that's completely overhauling the systems within an organization, the failure rate on those is about 70%. But if you go down to like the microsite level, like a really tiny project, the failure rate goes below 10%. So by keeping it simple and keeping it as simple as possible, you are removing risk from your project. Now, that's if once you've had your brilliant idea and you've met with your stakeholders and users, you now have a clear picture. However, you might be saying something that I find myself saying every day in my job, which is I've tried nothing, I'm all out of ideas. I have no idea what needs to happen next. I had this idea, I met with my users, I met with my stakeholders, things have changed. I don't really know exactly what happens next. In that instance, what I do is I meet with the experts. Whatever project I'm planning on taking on, there's somebody else that's done something similar. This is a part of the open source software ethos, which is, with many eyes, all bugs are shallow. So the idea is that with if I can leverage the work that someone else has done, that's less work for me. And so I reach out to people on my team who might have taken on a project that's similar to what I've done, or people in my network that might have taken on something that's something similar. If I don't know anybody in my network or team that can help, I reach out to people who've launched projects that I like that are relevant to me. I just want to make sure I can, see if I can get in touch with the people who've worked on it. And it's worth noting that agencies with relevant work case studies are always eager to talk about that. And I would also reach out to some folks over there to see how they've taken it on. So, we've now at this point, who is this for? Who needs to weigh in? What needs to be done? Now we're ready to start asking how do we get started? And this is a project management question. This is tackling the iron triangle of project management. If you're not familiar with the iron triangle, it's metaphor. It represents the three legs of every project that you'll encounter. It will have a scope, budget, and timeline. These three legs represent the constraints of your project. And what we need to do at this point, how do we get started, is we need to define the scope, budget, and timeline of what we're trying to take on. And every project manager will take a big project and break it into manageable pieces, right? So a big project gets broken into phases. The phases get broken down by deliverable, and activities, and the deliverable and activities then get broken down into tasks and user stories and spikes to do some research on the work. That's if you have if you can get there with your project, then you've identified your iron triangle. You break it down to manageable pieces. You put timeline and estimates to each of them. You have your scope, timeline, and budget. Now, sometimes you have a large digital project and you can't break it down, right? A lot of times when we're taking it on website development projects, the first 2 or 3, maybe even 5 months of the project are discovery, architecture, design. We're trying to figure out what needs to be built. And if you're in that place, sometimes it's impossible to define at a granular level all the tasks that need to be done on the project. If you find yourself in that space, and of course, there may be, if you find yourself finding a lot of tasks that need to be defined or better definition, it's very common that larger digital projects get split into 3 distinct engagements. The first engagement is strategy and design. This is this will help define all of the tasks that need to get you to delivery. If you feel it's too nebulous where you are, then of course once those tasks are defined and the scope is really codified, then implementation, enablement, getting into the development, any content migration that needs to happen. And then the third engagement typically isn't really planned until close to launch, which is the ongoing enhancements and support. Every project launches with a backlog. Again, software is never done being developed, so you'll always have a backlog on your software, and your project will launch with a backlog. And so once you understand how big that backlog is going to be, it's important to that's when you should size up the ongoing enhancements and support. So, again, if you feel like the iron triangle is too nebulous to define, there's too much risk to move forward, then break it down into smaller, less risky pieces. So when we are talking about how do we get started, again, what are the requirements? Listed requirements in priority order. Start there. What's the delivery deadline? Sometimes when I'm talking with a client, they have an upcoming campaign, or we would do a lot of work with universities. They want to make sure something's launched prior to student applications coming in. Like there's an important timeline driver that you need to make sure you are working towards. Sometimes that timeline driver is arbitrary, and in that case, it's still important to have a deadline to work toward. Make it realistic for the team, something that you're not going to kill yourself to get to, but also make it aggressive, because deadlines that are way out into the future tend to slip over time. So I would just be definitely be cognizant of when this thing needs to launch, set the expectations with stakeholders, and then be prepared to manage those expectations throughout the project. And then I think the next question is who's going to do the work, right? Sometimes it'll be done by your in-house team. Sometimes you'll bring in a partner. Whether or not the project, depending on the size of the project and the complexity of the project, doing it in-house or bringing in an agency or a freelancer is totally appropriate for various use cases. And so understanding who's going to do the work is important. And this is a different question than the time commitment from the organization, right? Leadership is not going to be doing the work, but they need to weigh in on it. And that weighing in on it requires time from them. And so this is a part of when meeting with your stakeholders, making sure that you're setting the expectation from them that they need to weigh in periodically and make themselves available in order to set this up for success for the organization. And then I think the last question I really want to dive in on is, what is the required budget? This is I think it's an emotional question for a lot of us. I think money itself is a commodity. A dollar is a dollar, whether it's in LA or New York or Tokyo. So it's always worth $1. But our relationship with money is not a commodity; it's emotional. And so I think sometimes when we're talking about the iron triangle, sheepishly, if we're talking about with leadership, we might, be uncomfortable managing up. And so we don't talk about budget, or we don't talk about budget with our partners because we feel like they might run to the top of our budget with their project plan. And frankly, the thing about the budget is it's a constraint on the project. And so if you don't know what your budget is, or you're not sharing what the budget is with your team or your partners, what happens is the expectations can go way all over the place on what that iron triangle should look like. Some people might see this might be a huge project. Some people might see a tiny project. That is a complete misalignment there. And again, and especially if you're going to RFP, I've seen this in feedback post the RFP process quite a bit, where they received like 20 proposals that were all over the map. And in large part, invariably, that is because the budget wasn't shared and every partner saw a different project. So sharing the scope, timeline, and budget in your RFP is definitely something that we recommend. And I have a talk about RFP writing as well. I wish I thought to drop a link into this into the chat. We'll follow up with a link to that as well. But this is these are the 4 questions, and these are the 4 questions I organize sort of project planning around. And again, I just want to come back to, this is the priority order in which I tackle these questions, not the chronological order. So when I'm meeting with people, I'm asking these questions with them, I'm revisiting these questions with my team. I want to make sure that we're in alignment, especially as plans and input and requirements are shifting. We want to make sure we're staying in alignment on these 4 questions. So if we answered these 4 questions, what's been done? What have we done? So first, we have users and goals. We have at least a rough sketch of users and goals for this organization, for this project. We might want to refine them as a part of the project, but that is definitely where we want to start. We want to make sure that the stakeholders are identified and consulted. If, again, you may have a large stakeholder group, you may have a small stakeholder group, but I guarantee if you're not thinking about your stakeholder group, it's going to be bigger than you think. I have the scars to prove it from 20 years of experience, that you want to make sure stakeholders are consulted early and often coming into these projects. And of course, you want the team commitments, right? I'm going to spend 50% of my time on this, and one of my developers is going to spend 80% of their time on this. And leadership, I expect 1 or 2 hours from you throughout the discovery period. This is something that's really helpful to make sure that you are getting those commitments early. One thing, again, scheduling a bunch of these projects, knowing how hard it is to schedule leadership and get them in the room. Getting this outlined before kickoff will help you maintain your timeline and velocity on the project. Of course, your requirements are outlined in priority order, and the initial scope, timeline, the iron triangle has been established. And then I think the last thing that's really, really important, again, software is never done being built. So some people might be thinking, you're building the MVP, right? The minimum viable product, or what I like to think of as the most valuable parts. Or some people might be thinking you're going to build a completely robust system before launching it. If you're staying active communication with your stakeholders and making sure you're listening to their requirements, gathering their input, and weighing that against your other priorities. If you are staying with active communication, then you're setting the expectations within your organization. And so not only are you, if your project launches and meets the KPIs, it's a success, but it's also perceived as a success within your organization, which sets us up for success throughout the engagement.